Hey, I just wanted to do a little video on how to diagnose your Sequoia if the center diff lock light is flashing after you've pressed the four-wheel drive button. This is a common problem, and I'm assuming if you're watching this video you're like me and you want to save as much money as you can. Otherwise you would just take it to the dealer and have them fix it for you. So anyway, if that happens, here's what I've found to be able to go ahead and diagnose that and figure out what's going on. Basically, in the manual on page TR47, lists the components that are in the four-wheel drive system. There's basically 8 of them. Right up front, on the front differential, you have what they call an ADD, or the front actuator. Inside you've got the four-wheel drive control ECU. You've got the button that you press to put it into four-wheel drive. You got a vehicle speed sensor. You got and this is up on the top of the transfer case here. These two switches. There's an L4 position switch and a neutral position switch, and those are just used for when you shift your lever into neutral or L4 on the transfer case. And then you've got the transfer case actuator assembly, and then screwed in right on top of that, you've got 2 more switches. You've got a number 1 four-wheel drive position switch, and right behind that is a number 2 four-wheel drive position switch. We'll go underneath and take a look at these locations here in just a second, but I want to show you a couple things that I've found out as far as troubleshooting. These 2 switches here, the number 1 and the number 2 position switches that are right behind that actuator, I've had both of those fail on mine. And I made a diagram. This is on the Sequoia wiring diagram for the actuators. This is the transfer case actuator, and this is the ADD. And it shows which pins they connect to, the wires that go from them up to the four-wheel drive ECU. But anyway, this transfer case actuator has 3 positions that it can be in. It's got high 2-wheel drive, a high 4 locked position, and that's when you put the differential lock on, and it's got a high 4 position, high 4-wheel drive. I wanted to know what position these switches were in depending on which position this actuator was in. So I went ahead and documented that. When you're in high 2, switch 1 and switch 2 are both open. When you're in high 4 locked position, switch 1 and switch 2 are both closed. And when you're in high 4 position, switch 1 and 2 are both open again. And again, that's these 2 switches right here. You can go ahead and, I'm going to show you one of these switches. You can pull one out. They're real easy to get to, real easy to take out, and you can test it. It's just got 2 pins inside, and all you're going to do is set your meter for continuity and push in the plunger. When you push it in, it should have continuity between those 2 pins, and if it doesn't, get you a new one. All these parts are, the Toyota parts are pretty expensive. The front one I think was about 85 bucks and the back one was 50, which makes absolutely no sense considering they're the exact same switch, other than the plug configuration is just a little bit different between the 2. But anyway, that's checking those 2 switches. Now checking the transfer case actuator. When I pushed the four-wheel drive button and it would get stuck and this center diff lock light was flashing, what was actually happening is this transfer case actuator had rotated to the high 4 locked position and then stopped because it didn't get the next signal that it was looking for. When it was in that position, I found a way that I can hook up and manually rotate these actuators. I'm going to show you how to do that. Okay, so what I've done, there's probably a lot of other ways to do this, but I didn't want to string wires from the battery down under the car. It was easier for me. I just got this little 12-volt battery out of a Power Wheels toy and had an extra plug for it. So when I plug this in, I know that it's got positive and negative marked on it here, so I know that the positive is coming on the white, the wire with the white stripe. And I went ahead and put two terminal connectors on the end, and then you need 3 pieces of wire. I just used some speaker wire and put some terminals on the end of those. Now, again, it'd probably be easier if you had some alligator clips or something like that, but this is what I had. So I took one of these type of terminals, put it on the end, and then in order to get it to connect onto these pins in the actuator, because they're really small and close together, I had to smash that terminal down inside. Let me turn on the light here. Anyway, so I smashed it down with some pliers to get it small enough to fit onto these pins, and then wrapped it with tape so that when they're plugged into each other here, they wouldn't touch. So anyway, like I said, when mine was stuck, it would be in the 4 locked position on that transfer case actuator, and the front differential wouldn't even have tried to go yet because this one didn't complete its cycle. So if you want to get this one, you want to get this at this point, basically you can start wherever you want to start. Go ahead and test your 2 position switches, see if one of those is causing it to not be able to actuate the rest of the way, because remember, at this point they should both be closed. So if either one of them aren't closed, it's not going to continue past that point. If they are, I'd go ahead and move up to the ADD actuator and measure it, and what you're going to have is, this is your pin configuration, and just orient yourself. The plug side of it, I always look at that, and so to the right of that is pin 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. If you measure between pin 3 and 4, and 4 is ground on all of these, 4 is always ground. If you measure between 3 and 4 and it's open, and between 2 and 4, and that's an open, and then between 6 and 4, and that gives you continuity, or a short, so it's closed, then you're in the free position, which means the differential is not engaged. But so if that happens, what I would do is hook up these wires manually, and you're going to use this one that you've smashed, that you got on both ends, and connect pins 4 and 5 together. Get on here, connect pins 4 and 5. Hook your positive to pin 6 and your negative to pin 1. And you've got to do this because, yeah, you can look at this diagram and see, okay, on your ADD, pin 1 and 5 go straight to the motor, but you don't want to hook your voltage just straight to that motor, because if you do, it'll spin the motor, well, if the motor works, it'll just keep spinning it, and even when it gets to the end position, it'll keep trying to spin it, and you'll possibly break something in that actuator, and I think they were about $400 or $500, so you don't want to do that. So anyway, if you hook it up this way, when it rotates, it'll disconnect power from the motor when it gets to the end position. So to go from the free to the locked position, hook it up in this configuration, and then listen, and if you hear the motor humming or buzzing or clicking, so you think that it's actually trying to go, at this point go ahead and tap on it with a wrench or the back of a screwdriver or something. Tap on the motor and tap on the housing of the actuator and see if that frees it up, because sometimes that'll do it too. It'll free up and it'll go ahead and spin. Okay, if you do get it to spin, then it locks up the differential. Then you can go ahead and just reverse the polarity. So to go from the lock to the free position, hook the negative to 2 and the positive to 1, and it should spin the motor the other direction. And okay, so then the front differential will be free, and the wheels will spin without turning the front drive line. Okay, so I hope I didn't make this too confusing, but that was the ADD, how to rotate that. Now, back to the transfer case actuator. If you want to manually rotate that, same thing. I use my battery and my ghetto wires here, and here's the configuration. So if you are in the high 4 lock position, and how are you going to know what position you're in? Well, right here, this table, you're going to measure between certain pins. Like if you notice, there's all no continuity except one between pin 4 and 6. If you've got continuity between 4 and 6, then you're in the high 4 locked position. Don't confuse that L4 with low. It's not low, that's just locked. And if you've got continuity between 4 and 5, you're in high 4-wheel drive position. And if you've got continuity between 3 and 4, you're in high 2-wheel drive position. So on mine, if I push a button, lights flashing, I had continuity between 4 and 6. So that puts me in the high lock position. So to rotate it from high 4 lock to high 4, you hook your positive to 1, hook pin 2 to pin 6, and hook your negative to 4. And here is your pin out on the plug for the transfer case actuator, which is actually the same pin out as the ADD. And then that'll rotate you over to the high 4 position. Now if you want to go from high 4 back to high 4 locked, so basically from 4-wheel drive back to the center of the actuator, then you got to do a little bit different configuring here. Negative to 1, hook pins 4 to pin 2, and then hook your positive to 5, and that'll manually rotate it back to your high 4 locked. And now if you want to go from high 4 lock to 2-wheel drive, then you use this configuration, but you just reverse your polarity. Hook negative to 1 and positive to 4, and that'll make it spin the other direction. Now Toyota does provide a diagram on how to do all this a completely different way. For example, for the ADD, they have this using a fuel pump relay and hooking it all up this way. I didn't like that way. I tried it, it didn't work for me. So I came up with my own, and this way works for me. You can do whatever you want to do. So I wanted to go, I think that's enough on this paper stuff. Oh, one last thing real quick. This diagram here is something I made up. We'll talk about this. If you unscrew the cover off of the actuator assembly and you look inside, if you're familiar with what a rotary joint is, this is what is inside of there, and these are the traces. This is your pin out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the picture, mind you. This is the motor, and these dots represent the different positions. If those dots are lined up with that bolt, and these are what these are is actually the rotary contacts, and there's 3 metal contacts that just turn around as that motor turns and makes different contacts with different traces that are inside of that cap. And if they're right here in this position, that's high 4-wheel drive. It rotates around, and then these 3 contacts are touching those and those. That's L4, and if it rotates even more, then the contacts are in that position. That is 2-wheel drive. So that's just a little diagram that I made up that kind of helps me to you know, when I came up with that, you know, with all the troubleshooting stuff I'm doing. But anyway, that may or may not help you. But if you look at this, this is how they're actually hooked up. So for example, pin 4 has a trace that physically goes inside of that rotor, goes all the way around, so no matter which position it's in, there's a contact with 4. And these contacts, so for example, in the L4 position, it's contacted with that trace on the outside, which comes around, pin 6. There's no contact with the center trace, or this one in the middle, but there is a contact here. So what it's essentially doing is hooking pin 4, which is the center one, to that outside trace, which is pin 6. So it's hooking pin 4 to pin 6. Internally, that's how it does it with that rotary joint. So you can look at these other ones and see right here, it's pin 4 and pin 5. And then in 2-wheel drive, it's pin 4 and pin 3. And this can all be verified, you know, in a number of different ways. Probably the easiest is right here. These are what's connected together, and that's how it does it, is with that rotor joint. And the front ADD uses the same type of system, but it does look different than this. It's not. I didn't make a diagram for it, but it's a little bit different on that ADD one. But it's actually simpler because it's only got 2 positions. It's either locked or it's free. Anyway. Okay, what I want to do is go ahead and identify some of the components, well, actually all the components, This is the car. This is an 03 Sequoia. I don't know if I've already mentioned that or not. Now, I haven't done the research to see what other years this applies to. I think it applies to 01, 2, 3, and 4. I have looked at an 05 that was a completely different system than this. So I don't know if it'll work on a Tundra or other things. You guys can check that out. But anyway, the ECU, the 4-wheel drive ECU, easy way I found to get to that is just pop this bezel off here from around the radio and all that stuff. And you basically just get it in your corner and just pop that off. It's just got clips to hold it on. I ended up taking the glove box out too to get the ECU out that side, but you don't have to get to it. When you pop this off, you'll see that it's basically straight back from here. Sorry, it's straight back from right here. That's where the ECU is. I don't know if yours looks like this or not. It probably does. This is your 4-wheel drive button and your center diff lock button, and then you've got your manual. I got all my junk here. Your manual lever to go from. It's for your transfer case. Basically, if you just want to go to low range. Okay, if we go underneath, driver's side. Start back here on the transfer case. And right there's their transfer case actuator. Let me get my light put in a good place here. So that's the transfer case actuator and its plug. So let me back up and try to get you in perspective here where that is. There's your transfer case. And that actuator is right here on the bottom, or the back side of it. We can rotate around, look at it from this view. That's the back side of the actuator. Sorry for the lousy camera work, but I'm laying on my back. That's just how it is. Try to get a view of the 2 position switches that I was talking about. Like I said, both of mine have been replaced. They both failed. Looking at the back of the actuator, you see the 2 switches barely. That's switch 1. This is switch 2, and they screw into the actuator assembly right here. Basically what you've got is a rod inside this housing that goes into the transfer case, and when that transfer case actuator spins, it moves that rod back and forth and engages and disengages different gears. This plug comes off real easy. And now let's see if I can get you a view of the pins. Let me get my light. Anyway, those are the pins that you connect to in there. And be careful, do not bend those pins, because if you do, if you bend one, you can probably straighten, but if you break one, you'd probably have to buy a new actuator. And it is a little tricky when you're checking continuity on these, because you're basically going by feel, you know, hooking up in there. These are your 2 switches. Just pop that off. You got the 2 pins in there that I showed you when you're checking for continuity on those, or just go ahead and unscrew them out of the actuator itself. They're easy to get to, both of them, just right there, and you can unscrew them and test them that way. Let's move up and look at the ADD. Oh, while I'm here though, let me point out something that I've learned. I'm going to put this plug back on. Okay, so your L4 position switch and your neutral position switch, they're up on top of the transfer case there. The one's got a green wire harness going to it, and then just in front of that one is the L4, which is got a black wire harness. It's really hard to see from here. You can barely see the tip of that switch, but coincidentally mine, I've tested those, the neutral position switch is not functioning, but I can still go in and out of 4-wheel drive, and I can go to low range, I can go to differential lock, it all works, and that switch does not work. So I don't know what that switch actually does. I know that it registers when you put the transfer case into neutral. That one's supposed to close, but mine isn't right now. But everything's working, so I'm not messing with it because they're really hard to get to. I'm not sure if you have to drop the transfer case to get to them, or if possibly you can take the shift lever off in the boot and change it that way. I'm not sure, but I'm not going to mess with it as long as everything else is working. If one of these isn't working, one of these actuators, one thing that some people have said is they've got corrosion built up on those contacts. Like I showed you the rotary joint contacts. And check everything before you ever take these apart, because getting them back together is a little tricky. It's totally doable because I've done it, but you want to do that last. But anyway, to take the cap off of this one, you've just got these 3 bolts. One there, and one there. Okay, then that pops the whole top of the assembly off, including the motor. This is the electric motor right here. Take that off, and then you can see those the rotary joint contacts in there. And if yours are dirty, clean them up, and that might get you going again too. If you do pull that off, you'll see 2 gears. You've got the little worm gear that your motor spins right here, goes inside that little worm gear, and then you'll see a white plastic gear. It's about that size. Don't pull that one off. If you do, it's pretty tricky to get it put back in the right way, because you got to get it put back on the right tooth. And I've done it. Which, on a side note, Toyota, when they sell this unit, it comes with that rod that goes in the transfer case, and you have to remove the transfer case and disassemble the whole transfer case to change that. Personally, I see no reason to do that, because that rod can't wear out. If the only thing that could wear out on this is the motor or the contacts inside of here, the motor and the contacts are both replaceable just with these 3 screws. Take that off, put a new one on, you'd be back in business. That's just my opinion. Toyota doesn't sell it that way, and they don't support it that way, but I sure as heck wouldn't disassemble my transfer case and replace that rod inside of it, because it's ridiculous in my opinion. It can't wear out. It's just a metal rod that goes back and forth. Anyway, go up here to the ADD. Now, let's see if I can get my light. This one, that's a really bad angle, but that's the ADD assembly right there, and you can see the plug on it. And so basically, the only good thing about this one is if you do want to check that, you can reach behind here. This plug's a little bit easier to get off. Well, sorry, not to get off. The pins are easier to see. And mind you, I'm trying to do this while I'm holding a camera, which isn't working out good for me. Okay, so you just squeeze the tab, pull the plug off. The good thing with this is you can look, I don't know if I can with the camera or not. Not really. But you can look in there and see the pins right in there. You can see the pins for when you're hooking up. For testing. Now, so one little trick with this I want to show you. Let me get this plug put back on. If you decide you want to clean your contacts in here, like if this won't spin and you're thinking that's the problem, well, if you want to actually replace the ADD, there's 4 bolts that you would have to remove, and then the whole assembly comes out of the differential. But if you just want to take the cap off, it's just like the transfer case one. It's got 3 screws instead of bolts, which sucks because it's a number 3 Phillips. There's one there, one on the top and one on the bottom, and they're going to be stuck hard. And what I found a little trick is take a punch, set right on the side of this bolt, and just tap on it with a hammer. It's got to get a long punch, you can reach in there, tap on the punch with a hammer and just hit the head of those, and it freed all mine up. And I was able to get them out, and then I put some anti-seize on them when I put it back in. But if you take those 3 screws out, you can pull this cap off, and it's just like the transfer case one. It's got the motor attached to it, the cap with the contacts in there for the rotary joint. the rotary contacts, and that could be your problem. If this thing, if you try to manually spin it and it won't spin, I would check that. Okay, while we're waiting here, I'm gonna wait for somebody to come help me and have them push the button so we can see I can show you what it sounds like and what it does when everything's working properly. What should happen, the transfer case actuator should spin. You'll hear it spin, engage, and then the front ADD assembly will also then engage and spin. They're designed in such a way that they can spin, and the gear has a spring on it, so the motor can turn it all the way to the position it needs to be in, but the gears won't actually mesh together until sometimes you have to reach and just grab the front drive line and give it a little turn to get the gears to line up. That'll get your transfer case to lock in, and then sometimes I'll reach over and spin the front tire a little bit to get the front differential gears to mesh together, and then that one will lock in. Okay, so right now I'm going to have my helper push the button to engage four-wheel drive, and you'll hear the motors go. Okay, so did you hear that? What it did is the transfer case actuator spun into the lock position, and then the ADD spun and locked the differential, and then the transfer case actuator continued going the rest of the way into four-wheel drive. Okay, so now let's say you've checked the transfer case actuator, and you can manually spin it both directions. You've checked both your position switches, and they both have perfect continuity when you engage the plunger. Okay, like so. You've checked your ADD actuator, and you can manually hook up your battery and spin it locked and free. All that stuff's working, but your four-wheel drive is still messed up. Well, it could be the ECU. Here on page TR53 is a diagram of the ECU, and to be honest with you, it's kind of confusing, and luckily I haven't had to deal too much with it. But it basically tells you, okay, like between pin 3 and 25 during the driving, you should be getting a pulse generation. Between pin 4 and 25 with the ignition switch on, you should have 10 to 14 volts, and when you touch the 2 to 4 selector switch, so the four-wheel drive button, it should go to 2 volts or less. I mean, on and on and on. That's all the tests you can do on here. You'll have to look that up if all this other stuff's working and you're suspecting maybe your ECU is the problem. So I hope this helps you. Let me know if you need any clarification on stuff, and good luck to you.